She screamed at me like the world belonged to her. "Either you hand over that car or I'll have it forcibly removed." Her voice cut through the Sunday air, shrill enough to make the entire neighborhood freeze. People peeked from porches, children stopped their bikes mid-ride, and for a moment the street felt like a stage. And at the center of it all stood Corinne, pastel blazer, eyes blazing, finger stabbing toward my Civic, determined to make me the villain of her kingdom. I didn't move, didn't flinch. My arms folded across my chest, calm as if I were watching a show I'd already seen. Because deep down, I knew something she didn't. Something that would turn this entire confrontation upside down. She whipped out her phone, dialing 911 like it was her personal weapon. She was certain she'd humiliate me in front of everyone. Certain that I would cower, apologize, maybe even beg her for mercy. But here's the thing about arrogance, it blinds you. And Corinne was about to discover that calling the wrong person could turn the accuser into the accused. Now, before I reveal what happened when those sirens pulled up, let me take you back just a few moments. All I wanted that morning was peace. A quiet Sunday. I'd only come down to grab my laptop from the car, maybe answer a few emails before grilling in the backyard. Nothing about my day involved drama. But in this neighborhood, drama had a name, Corinne. Or, as she liked to be known formally, Victoria, president of the Homeowners Association. The title she wielded like a sword. The crown she wore like she'd been elected to rule a nation. She blocked my car like a bouncer at a nightclub, shouting something about HOA Regulation 47B, subsection 3. Her words echoed with the certainty of law, and for a moment I watched the neighbors glance nervously at each other, wondering if I was guilty of some great crime. But I'd spent 15 years in federal service. I knew the difference between real authority and a woman pretending to have it. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, making her appear almost larger than life. She jabbed at my windshield, claiming my car violated mailbox access rules. She was loud enough to convince half the crowd, loud enough to make herself believe it, but not loud enough to drown out the truth. "Ma'am," I said quietly, pulling my phone from my pocket, "this is a public street. Your HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here." I tapped the record button with a soft click. Virginia was a one-party consent state, meaning she didn't need to agree to being recorded. And I had a feeling this would be the kind of performance worth keeping. Corinne's face twisted, her cheeks flushed red. "I don't care what you think you know about laws," she barked. "This is private property. I have the authority to remove unauthorized vehicles. Move that car voluntarily, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." The crowd gasped, their whispers buzzing like electricity. Arrested? Over a Civic? Some neighbors almost believed her. That's how powerful confidence can be, even when it's a lie. I let the silence stretch, let her voice echo in her own ears. Then slowly I reached into my wallet. The leather creaked as I unfolded it, the badge inside catching the morning light. Her eyes narrowed, trying to process the letters. Federal Interior Chief. The title printed clean and bold, the weight of the U.S. government behind it. And just like that, her voice cracked. "I don't care if you're the president," she blurted, though her pitch climbed higher, thinner. She wasn't convincing me anymore. She was trying to convince herself. But the damage was done. Neighbors saw the badge. They saw her authority crumble. And for the first time that morning, doubt flickered across their faces. Then came the sirens, wailing through the distance, growing louder, closer. Corinne's entire body lit up like a winner about to receive her crown. She smirked. She straightened her blazer. "That'll be the police," she declared. "We'll see what they say about your federal whatever when they drag you off my property." She thought this was her victory, but sometimes the sound of sirens doesn't bring salvation. Sometimes it signals the beginning of your downfall. And as those red and blue lights reflected against the windows of our perfect suburban street, I knew Corinne had just written herself into a story she wouldn't escape. Because when you pick the wrong fight with the wrong person, consequences always follow. The police cruiser rolled in slow, its tires crunching against the pavement, lights flashing red and blue against the tidy row of suburban homes. Neighbors inched closer, whispering like a crowd at a carnival. Corinne's chin lifted higher. Her victory parade was here. "That's right," she muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "Now you'll see what happens when you disrespect my rules." She actually said my rules. Detective Sarah stepped out of the cruiser. Mid-30s, sharp posture, the kind of presence that commanded without shouting. She'd seen it all before: parking disputes, shouting matches, neighbors dragging their grievances into the hands of law enforcement. She scanned the scene with that cool, measured look only seasoned officers have. "What seems to be the problem?" asked, her voice flat, neutral. Karen pounced on the opportunity like it was a stage cue. "Officer, this man is trespassing, violating our HOA laws, and refusing to comply. He needs to be arrested immediately." Her voice carried, dramatic, rehearsed. She listed her imaginary violations as if reading scripture. HOA Regulation 47B, mailbox obstruction, unauthorized vehicle. The words tumbled out of her mouth with the confidence of someone who believed sheer volume could transform lies into truth. I stood silent, calm, waiting. When she paused for air, I pulled out my badge and handed it directly to. "Detective, I'm Mark Chandler, Federal Interior Chief. I parked legally to retrieve work materials. This woman has threatened me with arrest over a public street." The silence that followed cut deeper than Karen's shrieks ever could. Eyes flicked from my ID to Karen's defiant face, then back to the badge. Her brows lifted just slightly, the kind of reaction officers give when the situation is no longer routine. Behind us, a neighbor's screen door creaked open. More residents drifted closer. Word was spreading fast. The crowd swelled, the atmosphere buzzing with anticipation. This wasn't just a parking dispute anymore. This was theater. "Ma'am," said evenly, turning to Karen, "are you aware this is a public road? HOA regulations don't extend here." For the first time, Karen's smile faltered, just slightly. But before the moment could sink in, Mrs. Roberts, quiet, older, nervous, stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice trembled but carried clear. "Officer, Mr. Chandler isn't the first one she's done this to. She makes up rules. She fines people. She threatens them. We've all dealt with it." The words dropped heavy. Neighbors nodded slowly, some murmuring agreement. Karen spun around, eyes wide, lips trembling in rage. "That's a lie. She's lying. They're all just jealous." But it was too late. The seed had been planted. Detective straightened, her gaze locked on Karen now, no longer neutral. "We'll be following up," she said firmly, pocketing her notebook. She handed me back my ID, her tone clipped but respectful. "Mr. Chandler, thank you for your cooperation." The crowd erupted in whispers. I caught Karen's face, red fatting to pale, her lips pressed so tight they quivered. The certainty she carried just minutes earlier was slipping through her fingers. I could have walked away right then. Could have taken my laptop, gone inside, and written the whole morning off as neighborhood drama. But something in the way Mrs. Roberts spoke, the fear, the relief of finally voicing the truth, made me pause. Because when someone finally cracks open the door to a secret, you have to decide. Do you step through, or pretend you never saw what was inside? That night I sat in my office, the glow of my laptop cutting through the dark. Coffee sat untouched at my elbow. I wasn't looking at emails anymore. I was digging, pulling up HOA filings, comparing numbers, tracing signatures, and what I found made my stomach twist. Fees had doubled in 2 years. Contracts signed with consulting services, Karen's own company. Tens of thousands of dollars vanishing into thin air. Regulations she screamed about earlier, they didn't even exist. The official bylaws listed nothing of the sort. Her power wasn't real, it was smoke, but that smoke had been suffocating families for years. And then, as if to prove I was getting close, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should drop this before it gets complicated. Some things are better left alone." No name, no explanation, just a warning. I stared at the screen, my reflection caught faintly in the glass. Karen hadn't just been bluffing for power. She was protecting something big. And now I was tangled in it. The doorbell rang just after 9. Sharp, urgent. I'd been staring at that text message for an hour, debating whether it was just bluster or the beginning of something darker. When I opened the door, Mrs. Roberts stood on the porch. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small recorder. She glanced over her shoulder twice before speaking. "Mr. Chandler, could I talk to you privately? It's about Karen. I stepped aside. She hurried in like someone afraid of being seen, and when the door clicked shut, her voice dropped to a whisper. What she did to you today, she's done to so many others. My husband and I, the before they moved the young couple on Elm Street. She finds people, threatens them, makes their lives miserable until they either pay up or leave. And nobody has been able to stop her. Her words carried a kind of exhaustion that only comes from years of fear. She slid the recorder across my table. Listen. A click, then Karen's voice filled my living room. The same shrill authority I'd heard that morning, but colder, more deliberate. The fee increase is necessary for enhanced community services, she declared. Don't bother asking for itemized expenses. You'll get them when I say you'll get them. Any homeowner who challenges this decision will face compliance reviews. My skin prickled. The tone wasn't neighborhood chatter, it was intimidation, systematic, planned. Mrs. Roberts leaned forward. That meeting wasn't even legal. They didn't have a quorum. Karen counted her husband's proxy vote twice. She's been fixing things for years. I pressed pause, sat back. The recording in my hands wasn't just proof of misconduct. It was evidence of a pattern, a structure. And suddenly the text I'd received, "Drop this before it gets complicated," made chilling sense. How long has this been going on? I asked. Her eyes flickered, fear, then resolve. 3 years, ever since her husband got that job with county zoning. Suddenly she was untouchable. Anyone who pushed back found themselves fined, cited, or worse. Mailboxes the wrong color, grass too tall. Cars parked 5 minutes too long. It's a machine, Mr. Chandler. She built a machine. The word hung heavy, machine. And she was right. The pattern was clear. HOA violations weren't random harassment. They were weapons, tools to silence anyone who might question the money trail. After Mrs. Roberts left, I sat in the glow of my laptop again, piecing together her story with what I'd already found. The puzzle was forming a picture I didn't want to see. Consulting services, a business registered to Karen's home address. No employees, no office, no license. Yet in just 2 years, the HOA had paid it over $60,000 for administrative services. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. This wasn't HOA politics anymore. This was embezzlement, fraud, corruption. And I'd stumbled right into it. The phone rang, unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Chandler? The voice was sharp, clipped. This is Wells, Assistant Attorney General with the Commonwealth of Virginia. We received a complaint today from a Mrs. She alleges you threatened her with federal prosecution during a neighborhood dispute. She claims you abused your position as a federal officer to intimidate her. The irony almost made me laugh. Karen had turned herself into the victim, escalating to the Attorney General's office without realizing the door she'd just kicked wide open. Ms. Wells, I said calmly, staring at the growing pile of evidence on my desk. I have documentation you'll want to see. It includes financial irregularities, recordings, and threatening messages that suggest Mrs. has been embezzling HOA funds. I also have evidence that her husband may be involved through his position in county zoning. Silence stretched on the line, long, careful, then Wells cleared her throat. Mr. Chandler, can you be in my office tomorrow morning? Bring everything you have. I hung up the phone, my hands resting on the desk, my gaze drifting toward the dark window. Outside, the street was quiet, peaceful, the kind of suburban calm Karen had built her fake kingdom on, but now I knew the truth. And tomorrow, the state attorney general would know it too. But here's the part I couldn't shake. Karen didn't just overstep by calling the police. She had the arrogance to take her story to the attorney general's office. And arrogance, when mixed with corruption, always leaves a trail. And I was about to follow it. The Virginia State Attorney's office looked like a fortress, gray granite, tall columns, the kind of place where lives and reputations were dismantled one signature at a time. I walked through the revolving doors with a file under my arm, evidence that had begun as a Sunday annoyance and now threatened to become a statewide scandal. Assistant Attorney General Wells greeted me in a conference room lined with law books older than both of us. She was sharp-eyed, early 40s maybe, the kind of prosecutor who didn't blink unless she meant it. "Mr. Chandler," she said, sliding a legal pad across the table. "Mrs. complaint against you raised red flags, but after reviewing the materials you sent last night, I think we're dealing with something far more serious." She spread out a stack of documents, my screenshots, Mrs. Roberts' recordings, HOA filings. Then she added her own. "These are financial records from the State Corporation Commission. We traced payments not just from your HOA, but from 3 others in the county, all flowing into the same consulting company registered at Mrs. address. Over $200,000 in the past 3 years. No employees, no documented services." The room tilted slightly. I'd expected fraud, maybe tens of thousands skimmed, but hundreds of thousands across multiple neighborhoods. That was no longer a local problem. That was a network. Wells' voice cut through my thoughts. "We also found zoning variances approved by her husband's office, all tied to the same HOAs funneling money to her consulting company. It looks like a coordinated scheme, embezzlement, conflict of interest, maybe zoning fraud." My badge sat heavy in my pocket. I'd seen corruption before, but never in my own backyard. Never disguised as something as ordinary as an HOA fee. "Mr. Chandler," Wells said firmly, "I'd like you to serve as a consultant to this investigation. Your background gives us credibility, but more importantly, you've already documented things that we can't ignore. This will make you an official part of our case." She slid a document toward me. It was formal, stamped, legal. A shield and a target at the same time. I signed. That night, as I sat at my desk reviewing the growing evidence, my phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. "Last warning. Drop this investigation or face consequences." I took a screenshot, attached it to the case file. But as I set the phone down, I couldn't ignore the weight in my chest. This wasn't empty bluffing anymore. Someone out there knew I was digging, and they were watching closely. The next morning, Wells introduced me to her digital forensics team, specialists who lived in the shadows of code and signals. They traced the threatening messages, preserving metadata, connecting dots I couldn't even see. "Threatening a witness in a corruption case is a felony," Wells said with a tight smile. "If Mrs. thinks intimidation will help her, she just upgraded her own charges." The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. Karen, who once believed she ruled our cul-de-sac, was now standing in the crosshairs of state and potentially federal prosecutors, and she didn't even know how deep the trap was closing. But here what made it dangerous: cornered animals don't lie down quietly, they fight. That afternoon, while reviewing more HOA records, Wells leaned back in her chair. "Mark, I need you to understand something. This isn't just fraud, it's systematic. Mrs. isn't some overzealous HOA president padding her pockets. She's part of something larger, and people who build networks like this don't give them up easily." Her words stayed with me as I drove home. The sun was setting over, painting the neighborhood in soft gold. Kids rode bikes, sprinklers ticked. On the surface, it was perfect suburbia again, but beneath the calm, I knew a storm was building. Because Karen had panicked. First, she called the cops. Then she called the Attorney General. Each move dug her deeper. Each move exposed more of her scheme. And now, every time my phone buzzed, I wondered if it was just another threat, or the start of something far worse. That night, sitting in the dark, I realized something chilling. Karen hadn't made a mistake by threatening me. She made a declaration, a promise that she wasn't finished. And people like her, they never quit until someone forces them to. The call came before sunrise, sharp, unforgiving. "Mr. Chandler, this is Special Agent Torres with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We need to meet immediately. Your HOA investigation has intersected with a federal case we've been building for 8 months. How soon can you get to our Richmond field office?" Sleep vanished from my body. Coffee couldn't have jolted me harder. I was out the door within minutes, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only anchor in a world that was suddenly spinning faster than I could keep up. The FBI office was exactly what you'd imagine: glass walls, fluorescent lights, corridors humming with quiet urgency. Agent Torres led me into a secure conference room. One wall was covered in photographs, charts, arrows, and red string connecting faces and companies across 3 states. And right there in the center of it all was Karen. "Mr. Chandler," Torres said, her voice clipped precise. "Your neighborhood dispute just gave us the missing piece of a network we've been tracking since last January. What you uncovered isn't just local embezzlement. Mrs. is coordinating a multi-state fraud operation." I stared at the web of connections. HOA presidents, contractors, county officials, shell companies with names designed to look forgettable. But the money trails, the thin red lines stretching across Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, told a story louder than any speech Karen had ever shouted. Torres tapped a file on the table. "Consulting services, it's not just siphoning money from your HOA, it's receiving payments from at least 6 others across state lines. Over $12 million stolen in 5 years. And your documentation, the recordings, the bylaw discrepancies, the threats, gave us exactly what we needed to establish federal jurisdiction." 12 million. The number rattled around in my skull like loose change in an empty jar. I thought I'd stumbled into neighborhood fraud. Instead, I'd tripped over the foundation of a criminal empire. Torres leaned forward. "We've been building this case carefully, slowly, watching the network, but Karen's reaction to you, the cops, the attorney general, the threats set off alarms. She panicked. And in her panic, she reached out to her associates. We intercepted those communications. Now we can tie her to the whole web." She slid photographs across the table. Karen meeting men in tailored suits. Karen unloading boxes late at night. Karen sitting in cafes with county officials whose faces now looked less like leaders and more like co-conspirators. Then Torres showed me something that froze me in place. Grainy photos of my house. My car, me leaving for work. "We've had you under protective surveillance since Monday," Torres explained. "This network doesn't just steal money. They intimidate, manipulate, and if necessary, eliminate threats. You're officially on their radar." The words sank in slow. Eliminate, not just scare, not just threaten. I thought of Mrs. Roberts clutching that recorder with trembling hands. Of neighbors who'd kept quiet for years because they feared Karen's wrath. And now I understood why. Tor's tone softened, but only slightly. "We'll keep you safe. But understand, Mr. Chandler, people who stolen millions and corrupted public officials don't play by HOA rules. They're desperate. They're dangerous. And now, thanks to you, they're exposed." I looked back at Karen's face on the wall, frozen mid-smile in one of the photographs. She looked ordinary, just another suburban woman in a pastel blazer. But that was the trick, wasn't it? Ordinary masks hide extraordinary corruption. Torres straightened. "Here, what we need from you. Continue as if you've been rattled by their threats. Keep documenting, but make them believe they've shaken you. While you play the vulnerable neighbor, we'll map their every move. If we do this right, we're not just bringing down Karen. We're dismantling the entire network." The weight of it pressed against my chest. A quiet Sunday argument about a parking spot had transformed into a federal sting operation. My life wasn't just entangled in this story, I'd become part of the script. As I left the Richmond office, Torres handed me a secure phone. "Check in every 4 hours, no exceptions. If they escalate, we respond immediately." The morning sun reflected off the glass doors as I stepped into the parking lot, gripping the phone like a lifeline. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Karen hadn't just overplayed her hand. She pulled her entire criminal empire into the light. And now the FBI was watching. Wednesday morning, my face was on the news. "Federal hero exposes HOA fraud," the anchor's voice boomed, her tone dripping with the kind of theatrical urgency that turned every story into breaking news. My photo flashed across the screen next to Karen's, hers blurred slightly as if already branded a criminal. The story painted me as the brave federal officer who exposed corruption hiding in plain sight. It was flattering. It was powerful. It was also dangerously premature. Because behind the cameras, no one had been arrested. No money had been recovered. The investigation was still hanging by threads too fragile to hold the weight of public scrutiny. My phone buzzed. "Agent Torres." Chandler, we have a problem. The media's outpacing us. Stories like this take months to build. Years, now. We've got hours before the entire network reacts. Her voice carried the kind of tension you don't ignore. By the time I arrived back at the Richmond field office, the place looked like a hive that had just been kicked open. Phones rang non-stop. Agents hunched over computers, scrolling through intercepted communications. A conference room filled with prosecutors and state officials looked like a war council. Tors pulled me aside, slapping a stack of newspapers on the table. Headlines screamed, HOA Queen under fire, millions missing from homeowners' pockets. Federal probe targets local associations. The good news, she said, is that victims are crawling out of the woodwork. Homeowners from Maryland, North Carolina, even Delaware are calling, emailing, begging to cooperate. They're giving us names, documents, bank records. We've got a flood of evidence we never dreamed we'd get this fast. I waited, because good news always came with bad. The bad news, Tors sighed, is that the network in full crisis mode. They're shredding documents, moving assets, planning escapes. If we don't move soon, we'll lose them. Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrison stepped into the room, his voice brisk, cutting. We're advancing arrests. Originally, we planned a month out. Now we do it this weekend, before they scatter. He spread photographs across the table. Karen, loading boxes into her SUV at 2 a.m. her husband, caught on security cameras feeding paper into a shredder long after office hours. Associates in suits carrying briefcases into anonymous office buildings. They're burning the evidence, Harrison said flatly. We don't have the luxury of waiting. My secure phone buzzed again. Another text from the same anonymous number. Mr. Chandler, you've made a serious mistake. Federal protection won't save you if you continue. Cancel tomorrow's press conference. This is not a threat. It's a promise. I showed it to Tors. She didn't even flinch. She simply handed it to a forensic tech who started tapping at a laptop. Every message is another nail in their coffin, Tors muttered. But I couldn't shake the weight pressing down. These weren't hollow taunts anymore. This was professional confidence. Whoever was behind those texts wasn't afraid of me. They were warning me like someone who'd already planned their next move. Thursday morning, the news grew louder. Karen had vanished from her house overnight. The place was gutted, files gone, computers missing, even furniture stripped bare. She's gone, Tors announced grimly during a 6 a.m. emergency briefing. Professional disappearance, either hiding locally or gone to ground with help from her network. No digital trail, no paper trail, nothing. The press conference scheduled for that afternoon was canceled. Reporters demanded answers. Headlines shifted from praise to suspicion. Federal hero or federal failure? HOA president escapes while investigation stumbles. And just like that, the narrative turned. Karen appeared on sympathetic media outlets, her hair neatly styled, her voice trembling with carefully rehearsed indignation. I'm just a homeowner trying to protect community standards, she told the cameras. This federal officer abused his power to attack me for doing my job. Now my life is being destroyed by lies. The performance was masterful. She painted herself as David against Goliath, a suburban woman persecuted by the government. Neighbors who once whispered against her were suddenly silent, intimidated by men in suits who visited their homes, reminding them they'd misunderstood what they saw. Witnesses wavered. Mrs. Roberts called me late at night, her voice breaking. They came to my door, Mr. Chandler, told me I remembered wrong, that Karen was just trying to help. People are scared. Some are even saying maybe she's innocent. The machine was fighting back, not just with lawyers, not just with threats, with propaganda, with fear. Tors convened the task force again, her face pale but steady. We're implementing Operation Spotlight. No shadows, no secrets, full transparency. If Karen wants to fight this in the media, we'll drag her crimes into the sunlight. Charts, records, text messages, all of it prepared for public release. The plan was risky. Federal cases usually thrived on silence, patience, control. But Karen had forced the battlefield into the open, and if we didn't adapt, she'd win. That night, staring at the flickering glow of my TV, I watched the news cycle shift again. Karen, hand on her chest, pleading into the camera. This is what happens when ordinary citizens challenge federal power. Then a split screen. FBI agents seizing boxes of documents, accountants breaking down financial charts that proved money was missing. And caught in the middle was me, the face of the investigation, praised and blamed in equal measure. The neighborhood where this all began sat quiet, its manicured lawns betraying no sign of the war being fought in boardrooms, courtrooms, and living rooms across 3 states. But I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't about a car anymore. It wasn't even about one HOA president. It was about power, how people abuse it, how they hide behind it, and what happens when someone finally refuses to bow down. And the fight was far from over. Saturday dawned heavy, the sky a dull gray, like it knew what was coming. Across 3 states, federal agents moved in silence, boots crunching against driveways, radios whispering orders. The takedown was happening, not next month, not next week. Today. I sat in the Richmond field office, watching it all unfold on a wall of screens. Live feeds showed agents hauling boxes from HOA offices, stacking computers in evidence vans, zip-tying men in business suits who once strutted around neighborhoods like kings. This is the largest coordinated HOA fraud bust in federal history, Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrison declared, his voice flat but charged with quiet triumph. And then came the footage everyone had been waiting for. Karen, dragged from a safe house on the outskirts of town, still in her pastel blazer, still clutching a handbag like it contained her crown. Cameras were waiting. News anchors were waiting. The whole country was waiting. And as federal marshals led her out in cuffs, she tried to twist the narrative one last time. This is what happens when ordinary citizens try to protect their communities, she shouted, her voice raw but clear. The government destroys you if you dare to question them. The reporters ate it up. Flashes lit the morning air. Her words were plastered across headlines before she even reached the courthouse. But what she didn't know, what the public hadn't seen yet, was that digital forensic specialists had cracked into cloud servers Karen's network didn't even realize were backing up automatically. Those servers contained everything. Emails, texts, financial spreadsheets, even recordings of their own meetings where they detailed witness intimidation, evidence destruction, and strategies to frame me as a rogue officer. They kept a diary of federal crimes, Torres said, almost laughing in disbelief as she handed me a tablet full of files. Every scheme, every cover-up, every illegal move they've made for 5 years, it's all here. The noose was tightening, and this time it wasn't just around Karen's neck. It was around the entire network. That afternoon, press conferences painted the new picture. Agents held up charts that showed money trails snaking through fake companies. Prosecutors laid out evidence of zoning fraud, kickbacks, money laundering. And for the first time, the narrative shifted. Karen was David fighting Goliath. She was Goliath. And the mask she wore, the pastel blazer, the trembling voice, the concerned neighbor routine, cracked wide open under the weight of undeniable proof. But the fight wasn't over. Friday evening, Karen's legal team hit back with emergency motions in federal court. They called me a biased investigator, claimed the entire case was the fruit of a poisonous tree, argued that I had overstepped my role as a federal consultant. The legal jargon was sharp, designed to cut holes in months of work. And for a few tense hours, it worked. News outlets questioned whether the arrests would hold. Commentators debated on live TV whether I'd been reckless, whether Karen was being railroaded. Then came the twist. Digital forensic specialists uncovered an email chain directly linking Karen to county officials, one of them her husband, where they discussed how much to raise HOA fees and how to funnel the excess into their shell companies. Line after line, timestamp after timestamp, it was all there in black and white. Case closed, Torres muttered, slamming the folder onto the conference table. But Karen wasn't done. Sunday morning, she appeared voluntarily at the courthouse, walking hand in hand with her attorneys, head held high, cameras flashing like it was a red carpet premiere. She thought she'd spin it, thought she'd win the sympathy card again. Instead, prosecutors hit her with fresh charges before she even stepped inside. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness intimidation, attempting to frame a federal officer. The air outside the courthouse crackled as protesters gathered not for her but against her. Former HOA residents, neighbors, families she drained dry. They held signs that read, "Where's our money?" and "No one is above the law." Her pastel mask cracked then. I saw it. On the steps under the cameras, the tremble in her jaw as the chants rose louder than her voice. The woman who once screamed about mailbox violations now stood accused of stealing $22 million. And there was nowhere left to run. But here's the part that still haunts me. Even with the cuffs around her wrists, even with the evidence stacked higher than the courthouse steps, Karen turned to the cameras one last time. "This is persecution," she spat. "Mark Chandler destroyed my life because I dared to stand up to him." Her eyes locked on mine in the crowd, cold, defiant. And in that moment, I understood something chilling. Karen wasn't afraid of prison. She was afraid of losing her story. Because for people like her, the lie is the last weapon they ever put down. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of witnesses stepping forward, one after another, voices shaking as they told stories of intimidation, fines, fear. 6 weeks of accountants unraveling shell companies like threads in a cheap sweater. 6 weeks of Karen sitting at the defense table in her pastel blazer, trying to look like anything other than the architect of a multi-million-dollar fraud. I watched from the gallery, day after day, as the case I never meant to start unfolded into the largest HOA corruption trial the state had ever seen. Mrs. Roberts first. Her voice wavered, but her courage filled the courtroom. "She told me if I didn't pay, she'd take my house," she said, eyes glistening. "We were scared, we paid, for years we paid." Neighbors nodded, some cried, and piece by piece, Karen's empire of fear crumbled under the weight of truth. When prosecutors played the recordings, her voice threatening, mocking, dismissing, the jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When they displayed the spreadsheets showing millions funneled into consulting services, the defense attorneys stopped scribbling notes. They had no answers left. And then came the moment that broke everything open. An email chain between Karen and her husband, projected on a massive screen for the jury to see. Raise dues another 15%. Use the same contractor. Split the difference. Her own words, black and white, a smoking gun. The defense tried to spin it, said it was taken out of context, said it was routine administration. But the jury didn't buy it. You could see it in their faces. When the verdict came, the room held its breath. Guilty on all counts. Karen's face didn't break. Not a tear, not a flinch. Just a cold, hollow stare that followed me as marshals led her away. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, her husband to 18. Associates scattered like leaves in a storm, some cutting deals, some vanishing into the cracks they once crawled out of. The empire was dismantled, the money trail exposed, the neighborhoods freed. But victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt quiet. Returned to normal in the strangest way. Kids rode bikes again. Lawns stayed trimmed not because of threats, but because people wanted pride in their homes again. The HOA, stripped of Karen's claws, elected a new board, neighbors who cared more about community than control. Mrs. Roberts brought cookies to the first meeting. People laughed for the first time in years, and for the first time felt like a neighborhood, not a kingdom. One evening, as I sat on my porch, the sun setting behind the rooftops, a neighbor I barely knew stopped by. He looked hesitant, then said softly, "Thank you for standing up, for not letting her win." I didn't know what to say, because the truth was I hadn't been a hero, I'd just been stubborn. I'd refused to give up my car, I'd refused to bow to a bully. And somehow that small act had torn open a wound that revealed millions in corruption. But that's how it happens, isn't it? Not with grand gestures, not with speeches, with small choices. A line drawn in the sand that says, "No further." Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. I thought about Karen often in those months after. How someone who once obsessed over mailbox paint colors could build a criminal empire. How someone who smiled at block parties could steal millions behind closed doors. And I realized something. People like Karen don't start out dreaming of fraud. They start with control, a taste of power, the rush of making others bend. And when no one stands up, when silence becomes normal, that taste becomes hunger. Hunger becomes greed. Greed becomes empire. She thought she was untouchable. She thought the badge I carried was just another threat to silence. She never realized it was the truth that would silence her. One night, weeks later, I received a letter, no return address. Inside was a single sentence typed in all caps. "The machine is bigger than he." No signature, no explanation. Just a reminder that maybe, just maybe, Karen had only been one gear in something larger. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and sat quietly on the porch as crickets sang. Because I knew one thing for certain. The machine might still be out there. But sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to move their car, to bring the whole thing crashing down. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.